It was 1:14 a.m. in a quiet hotel room during major championship week, and a 25-year brotherhood was quietly suffocating in the dark. For 2.5 decades, Jim "Bones" Mackay didn't just carry Phil Mickelson's bag. He was the man standing beside a global icon through 6 major titles, iconic high fives, and millions of dollars in prize money. He was the ultimate protector of golf's most magnetic, larger-than-life figure. But behind closed doors, loyalty has a price tag, and at 56 years old, Bones was looking at a ledger that didn't add up. Then came the explosion. 400 private text messages quietly leaked from a paper trail spanning 2012 to 2017. These weren't casual locker room banter or simple strategy notes. They were time-stamped paper trail proof of late-night wire transfers, unhonored financial promises, and an escalating dispute that finally boiled over inside a private player locker room at Augusta. What terrifying truth was buried inside that 2017 locker room confrontation, a scene so volatile that both men swore an oath of total silence for 5 straight years? And more importantly, why would a caddy who spent his entire adult life guarding Phil Mickelson's deepest secrets suddenly risk his career, his reputation, and his pension at age 56 to press send? To understand the leak that shook the foundations of professional sports, you have to look past the pristine green jackets and the roaring galleries and step straight into the hidden paper trail behind golf's most iconic duo. To the rest of the world, Phil Mickelson and Bones Mackay represented the gold standard of professional sports partnerships. When Phil pulled off his legendary high-risk flop shots from deep rough, Bones was the steady anchor, whispering the exact yardage into his ear. When Phil walked up the 18th fairway at Augusta to secure his green jackets, Bones was the first man he embraced. The public saw 2 brothers riding into the sunset, sharing in tens of millions of dollars in tournament purses. That was the public myth. The private ledger told a completely different story. The mechanics of their partnership were turning toxic. A tour caddy lives on a simple contract, a base weekly fee to cover travel, plus a 10% cut of a tournament victory. After carrying a bag for 72 agonizing holes to secure a major championship, Bones wasn't getting a wire transfer. He was getting a midnight text message. "I'll cover the $15,000 base fee next week, Bones. Put your win bonus toward the future equity share." It was paper promises used to pay for real sweat. Bones was walking miles under blistering sun, managing a superstar's emotions on national television, and receiving "I owe us" while watching his boss live a lifestyle of unfathomable luxury. The creditors weren't just calling Phil anymore. They were showing up in the gallery, standing behind the ropes at tournament practice rounds, staring down the fairway. Before we reveal which high-level tour executive read these exact text messages and made a midnight phone call in 2015, if you're enjoying this deep dive into sports' biggest hidden scandals, drop a comment below on whether you think Bones should have stayed silent, and subscribe to the channel. It's 1 a.m. on a Thursday morning before an opening round. The room is dark, lit only by the blue glow of a phone screen. "You know I'm good for it, Bones." Phil's voice rasps through the receiver. Bones sits on the edge of the mattress, his head in his hands. "My kid's tuition is due Monday, Phil. I don't need good for it. I need the wire." Silence. 3 agonizing seconds of dead air. Then a sharp click. Phil hangs up. That phone call wasn't just about unpaid caddy fees. It was the exact moment a financial dispute transformed into an existential family crisis. For decades, Bones convinced himself that protecting Phil was part of the job description. But when your boss's off-course wagers start swallowing the money meant for your children's future, loyalty becomes self-destruction. Bones wasn't dealing with a golfer who was short on cash. He was tethered to a man who treated every human relationship as a chip he could double down on at the table, and the pressure was mounting on both sides. Bones was carrying more than just 14 clubs. He was carrying the weight of a spiraling empire. What Phil didn't realize was that someone else was watching the entire collapse in real time. Someone inside the PGA Tour's highest corporate offices read every single one of those desperate late-night texts in 2015, And then they made a phone call. The question is, to who? Before we reveal who received that midnight call, hit subscribe and ring the bell. We break down the untold stories and hidden power moves behind sports' biggest cover-ups every single week. When that corporate phone call was made in 2015, it didn't go to law enforcement and it didn't go to financial regulators. It went straight to the tournament committee brass, the high-level executives whose sole responsibility was protecting the multi-billion-dollar PGA Tour broadcast. In elite golf, image is the entire business model, and a caddy's financial scandal was worth far less to them than one more major championship broadcast. Instead of stepping in to protect a working caddy whose family security was on the line, the institution made a cold, calculated decision: shield the star, suppress the noise, and keep the cameras rolling. For 2 years, they managed to keep the lid on the pressure cooker. But by the summer of 2017, the pressure reached absolute critical mass. It happened during a delayed weather break inside the private player locker room. Away from the gallery, the media, and the security detail, the public facade completely shattered. Bones confronted Phil face-to-face over an unhonored $900,000 major championship bonus that had been delayed for over 8 months. What began as a tense discussion rapidly devolved into a heated standoff. Eyewitness accounts and text logs from that afternoon describe an explosive confrontation, voices echoing off the wooden lockers as 2 decades of suppressed resentment boiled over in seconds. Bones didn't just demand his money. He laid down an ultimatum: settle the debt, or he walked off the course before the final round. Within hours of that locker room explosion, the golf world was blindsided by a polished, carefully worded press release announcing that Phil Mickelson and Jim Bones Mackay had agreed to a mutual, amicable separation after 25 years together. The public bought the story. The media called it the natural end of a legendary era. But the 400 leaked texts prove that the official statement was a total fiction, a corporate cover-up engineered to bury the real Clubhouse incident before it ruined the tour's biggest draw. Yet sealing a vault with corporate PR only works if everyone involved stays quiet forever. And some secrets refuse to stay buried. Strip away the corporate press releases, the pristine locker rooms, and the polished television broadcasts, and professional sports always comes down to a human being sitting at a kitchen table. For 5 years after that 2017 split, Bones Mackay lived under a heavy, suffocating silence. He had signed the non-disclosure agreements. He took the quiet settlement payments. He watched from a distance as Phil transitioned to rival leagues and new multi-million-dollar contracts while he quietly rebuilt his life away from the center of the storm. He was 56 years old. His career as an elite frontline caddy was drawing to a close, and every time he looked at his family, he carried the silent weight of a quarter-century of buried truths. The tipping point didn't come from a sudden desire for revenge or a late-night phone call demanding a payout. It happened on a quiet Tuesday evening when a routine medical bill arrived in the mail, and for the first time in his life, Bones realized the financial cushion he was promised in exchange for his lifetime of silence was quietly evaporating. The institutional guardrails weren't protecting him anymore. The men who had bought his loyalty with corporate handshakes and closed-door promises had moved on. He was left looking at a laptop folder containing 400 time-stamped text messages, draft contracts, and ledger entries spanning a decade. He opened the first file. If you're finding this untold story valuable, make sure to subscribe to the channel right now to support these deep dives, and tell us in the comments what you would have done in Bones' shoes. For 25 years, he had protected his boss from his own worst impulses. He had lied to reporters, managed angry creditors, and taken the fall for quiet locker room blow-ups. But loyalty is a two-way street, and sitting there at 56 years old, Bones realized he had spent his entire life guarding a vault that was entirely empty. The cursor hovered over the export button, and for the first time in a decade, he didn't call a lawyer. He just stared at the screen, knowing that the moment he pressed send, life, as everyone knew it in professional golf, would instantly cease to exist. When those 400 private messages finally hit the light, the immediate instinct of every sports media outlet was to frame this as the ultimate act of bitter revenge. A disgraced ex-employee using leaked records to extort a legend and recoup unpaid bonuses. That is the story everyone expected, but that is not what the texts actually reveal. When you read through the time-stamped log chronologically, the false floor drops out entirely. The final 30 messages in that thread, sent during the frantic 48 hours leading up to the leak, weren't demands for cash. They were desperate, unanswered warnings. Bones didn't press send to burn Phil Mickelson down. He pressed send as an emergency nuclear option intervention. The leaked logs reveal that in the weeks prior, Phil was on the verge of placing an unprecedented double or nothing off-market wager on an active tournament. A move so severe it wouldn't have just ended his career. It would have triggered a federal sports integrity investigation that threatened to tear down the entire sport. For 10 years, Bones had been the only person in Phil's inner circle who had the courage to say no. He was the human dam holding back a catastrophic flood. But after the 2017 split, when the corporate brass pushed Bones out to protect the brand, Phil was left surrounded entirely by enablers who nodded along as the risks escalated to dangerous levels. At 56 years old, sitting at his kitchen table, Bones realized he had run out of private ways to stop the man he had spent half his life protecting. The final 30 messages weren't demands for money. They were something far more dangerous than anyone expected. When you look back at those 400 leaked texts, the locker room confrontations, and the years of corporate silence, the real story isn't about missing wire transfers, unhonored bonuses, or broken NDAs. It's about the hidden price tag of sustained athletic royalty and the impossible position of the people hired to stand in the shadows. For 25 years, the world saw a flawless partnership, pristine green jackets, triumphant high fives on the 18th green, and legendary risk-taking. But behind that curtain was a quiet, working-class caddy who sacrificed his own security, his reputation, and ultimately his peace of mind to navigate hazards far more dangerous than any water feature or fairway bunker at Augusta. He was forced to choose between the unwritten code of professional sports and the survival of his own family. Was Jim Bones Mackay right to break a quarter-century of silence to force a desperate intervention? Or did he cross an unforgivable boundary in the unwritten rules of golf? Drop your take in the comments below and let us know what city or country you're tuning in from today. We read every single response. Exposing the truth behind closed doors takes endless research. If this deep dive brought you real value and revealed the side of sports the media tried to hide, hit the like button right now, subscribe to the channel.